So today we're going to spend the next 2 hours talking about descriptive talking, teaching, testing, specifically with students using AAC systems in what is known as the descriptive teaching model. And of course, I'm Gail Van Tatenhove, and as Professor Dada says, I'm coming to you today from Orlando, Florida. Hopefully today that I'll be very clear in what I'm presenting, and that there will also be sufficient time at the end of this session to answer any of your questions. But if something pops up later and you have another question or some sort of comment you would like to have me address, you can see my email right there, and I'd love to be in conversation with you about the application of descriptive talking, teaching, and testing. Today, my focus today is to help you learn about the origins of the descriptive teaching model, the difference between descriptive talking, descriptive teaching, and descriptive testing. And we're going to see there's very distinct and subtle differences between those three things, as well as some practical steps for you to start implementing descriptive teaching in the classroom. And you'll notice on my slides, whenever you see one of those symbols with the finger with a string tied around it to remember, that's an icon to help us remember. There's going to be some very key points on those slides that are critical for you to remember. So that's just a little alert that I've added to the slides. In addition today, I hope that we'll have enough time at the end where you can have a little practice applying the information from this webinar. And this will be an opportunity for you to participate with your colleagues in the chat window to respond to some very specific things that I'm going to be asking you later on in the webinar. Plus, I'm hoping at the end of this presentation, you'll have some vision where you can make a personal plan for how you are going to implement descriptive teaching, as well as a plan to join not just this 2-hour session, but the worldwide community of people who are discussing descriptive teaching. So I'm inviting you to join everybody that around the world is talking about how descriptive teaching is impacting their practice with AAC users. Let's start by thinking about the origins of the descriptive teaching model. How far back does it go? Well, first off, the most important point I want people to remember is I did not invent descriptive teaching. Many times I am attributed as the inventor of this, or Gail Van Tatenhove, who thought up descriptive teaching. I cannot take credit for that. That was not me. Now, I have been applying it for quite a number of years, but I absolutely did not invent descriptive teaching, because the roots of descriptive teaching go back very deeply into the days in our field of AAC when everyone primarily and only had access to manual communication boards. Now, there would have been some people doing, sign language and a lot of other strategies, but this was before the days when speech generating devices were available. So these roots go back into the 70s, the 1970s for me, because I started practicing, in 1972 through 76 at the university level, where I did have experience working with kids using communication boards, as well as professionally as a paid speech-language pathologist in 1977. And in those days, the only thing available for us were manual communication boards. And descriptive teaching was something everyone did with AAC users, with manual communication boards. It was a widespread practice. And I want you to take a look intentionally at this photo I put on here. It's not just a placeholder, but we see 4 students in wheelchairs that have a lap tray in front of them with a big communication board in front of them. And then there's one child in the background, a little further back, whose communication display is on an incline. And this user is not using a single piece of paper like the other 4 are, but is using a communication book. And that's why the person is sitting next to him, so that she can turn the pages and scan through the items on the board for him to communicate. So this was the world of AAC that I entered. I entered the world of kids using lap tray based communication displays or communication books. And so descriptive teaching was something everyone did, particularly with AAC users using manual communication boards. And we did that because those boards have a limited amount of space. Those 4 students with lap trays with a single sheet or a single page design in front of them had a finite amount of space. When all of those symbols were filled up, that was pretty much going to limit them to what they could say. And the boy that had the multiple page design, the book, for him, even if he could walk, it would have been too big or heavy. And it does require him, somebody to help him navigate through the pages. So those are inherent design issues with manual communication boards. They just have a limited amount of space. And if you want to add to that space to have more words, it just gets bigger and heavier and just clunkier to use. So for those AAC users who could not spell, and this happens to all of our AAC users in 2022, if the AAC user cannot spell and they have a manual communication board, that AAC user is going to run out of space for all the words that he or she is going to need. So my mentors, my early instructors said and taught me that due to this design issue, we need another way to communicate words when they're not available on a communication board. If you can't spell the word, what are we going to do? So that became some of the early roots of descriptive teaching. And primarily in the early days, descriptive teaching was done primarily by classroom teachers. They were implementing it long before speech pathologists started talking about it or doing it. But it was, fortunately, as a speech pathologist, it was one of the fundamental principles taught to me by my teachers at the university level and my mentors in the early years that I began practicing in the schools. All right, there it goes. And my teachers and my early mentors taught me 4 things. Said these are the 4 basic principles, which was in about 1977, that we felt you needed to build your practice of AAC upon. And I will say to you today, these 4 principles have stayed the course for me from 1977, when that was first drilled into my head, all the way now to 2023, where we're knocking on the door of 2023. So these are principles that I feel very confident sharing with you, that it will stay the course for you also in your practice in supporting AAC users. And the 4 principles they taught me was, if you're going to on language development, and you're a speech pathologist, so that's your responsibility. If you're going to work on language development, that requires the use of frequently used words, which in today's vernacular, we say core vocabulary. And later in the presentation, I'm going to just touch again on core vocabulary. If you don't know what that is, hold on to your horses. I'll cover it a little bit later. So it says you need to have these frequently used words. You need then, once you've given kids these frequently used words, you need to work on combining these frequently used words. So we might have given them frequently used words like go and here and there and in and out and I and you. So once I've given them those frequently used words, I'm going to work on combining them. So I can say go here, go there, go in, go out. You go, I go. And then my next principle is I have to add word endings as necessary and available. Because remember, this was a world of manual boards where there wasn't always a lot of extra spaces. And so maybe I didn't put all the different verb endings, a key or a space for all the different verb endings, because that was going to take up 5 or 6 more keys or spaces. But I know my goal was to work on them saying, I going, you going, he went, he is going. So that was, they said, as a speech pathologist, give them the words, teach them to combine the words, teach them to put word endings on. But they also said, as a speech pathologist, you got one more thing you have to do. One more really critical thing that's on your responsibility list, and that was to teach vocabulary extension strategies. That's what it was called back in about 1975 to 77. It was called vocabulary extension strategies because it was my responsibility to virtually extend that AAC user's vocabulary. Because remember, this was a manual communication board world where we only had a finite amount of space to put vocabulary. And if you couldn't spell, we had to have virtually a way to extend that vocabulary. So we borrowed principles from what was being done with Bliss symbolics. And I just put a reference there for you if you're not familiar with Bliss symbolics. I know historically Bliss symbolics have been used in South Africa. I recall from 1992, which was my first trip to South Africa, and I was in Pretoria, and I was taken by Dr. Erna Alant to visit a school. And at this school, there were all sorts of kids using Bliss symbol boards. So there is history of Bliss symbolics in South Africa. But if you're totally unfamiliar with it, these vocabulary extension strategies, which we borrowed from Bliss symbolics, said, you know, if you want to expand your kids' vocabulary, you want to have them be able to communicate additional words that aren't visually represented on their manual communication boards, let's create some special symbols. And then we're going to take these special symbols, and the kid can point at one of those special symbols and then add a picture or a symbol that is on their manual communication board. And the communication partner then is going to make some logical guesses based on, you know, what's going on, the context, what are you talking about, as well as to the table, the communication partner brings his or her linguistic knowledge. I have a lot of words in my head. I know a lot of words. I should be able to figure out, based on my familiarity with the AAC user, what they're trying to communicate to me when they pair this special symbol with a symbol that's already on their manual communication board. So I've given you some examples there. If they point at the symbol for same, and then they go to their picture of letter, I have to start guessing based on what we were talking about and what's going on around me. Maybe they're trying to communicate the idea of mail or email or postcard. The same with part of. If I look at this picture of a letter going in, or maybe it's out of that envelope, maybe it means envelope, or maybe I think of the stamp that's on the envelope. And you want, they say the word get, and they said opposite of get. Well, maybe it's give or send. Or maybe this kid is using some of their phonological knowledge and thinking about, you know, I got a symbol that kind of sounds the same as the word I want. So let's go same sound, or sounds like could be. Sounds like letter, well, maybe that's later. So I was taught teach these to kids. These things are critical. We're going to talk about that today, a little bit later on, of how do you actually teach kids to be strategic like this. And that goes back to my early days because we did it with bliss symbols. My teachers and mentors also told me that when kids are struggling to give you information, coach them to give you clues. Coach them to give you clues. And the roots of this is back to our recollection of what happens to all of us, particularly as we age. We start doing something called circumlocution. Individuals who struggle with stuttering do circumlocution. If they know that they're going to stutter on an individual word, they'll talk around the word. They circle around the world, giving you different ideas. And so the type of strategies that I might have done with an elderly person, and I did this frequently with my mother, who struggled with word recall issues, I would have her give me some words or ideas as clues. And this is what I would do with an AAC user. If they're trying to communicate something to me, I would say, on your board, tell me something that's close to it. What's like it? Who would get it? Why would you get it? How does it make you feel? And so those clues a kid could give me, like letter, it's like a letter from grandma for my birthday, it made me happy. I'll figure out you're trying to communicate to me birthday card. So I was taught by my mentors, you got to teach kids to do this. They're not always naturally going to do that. So in our brief history of descriptive teaching, I have to credit Bruce Baker. He first coined the term descriptive teaching, and he coined it in the early 2000s. I don't know exactly when in a presentation or in some literature he wrote that he used it, but I think I'm safe in saying it was the early 2000s. He was the one that started talking about the descriptive teaching model. And just to make sure I fully credit Bruce Baker, he is the inventor of the MinSpeak system for representing vocabulary in speech generating devices. And what Bruce did in the early 2000s, because by this time we've got speech generating devices. Our AAC users are increasingly not using manual communication boards, and they are receiving as their first and primary AAC system a speech generating device. And the attitude at that time was that, wow, we don't have limitations anymore. We're not limited by a single sheet of paper that has a finite amount of space. We're now in this world that, we're being told it's got how many gigabytes of memory. We've got unlimited space. So where we're not restricted anymore. We can give them more, and we can give them thousands and thousands of words. But he said, no, yes, we can give them thousands of words, but there's still a place for doing descriptive teaching. And he saw what was happening with both the language development as well as the educational progress of AAC users. Because in all of this unlimited space, it was being filled with nouns, primarily nouns, because the bulk of their vocabulary, the 350 words that you need that are core vocabulary words, were in there. But we didn't need more core words because that's about the extent of them. So what was happening in schools is the focus was being put on the temporary. So I'm going to be doing a lesson today on hurricane preparation or on emergency preparation. And I need hurricane and tornado and wind, and all these words, which I'm going to use for about 2 weeks. So the focus was on the temporary instead of the core words that we need to develop language and which can be used in our classroom lessons to meet our educational curriculum. And so he kind of pulled back our reins a little bit and said, even though we have speech generating devices, we have to focus on teaching the core. So today's emphasis on core vocabulary, or today's emphasis on descriptive teaching, is not because we're any longer trying to deal with a finite amount of space. We're still trying to make sure, however, that we are giving kids access to the real language they need for everyday communication. So let's talk about the difference between, and as well as the value and importance of descriptive talking. So we're going to break it into the components of descriptive talking, descriptive teaching, and descriptive testing, which all come under the umbrella of just the term we say descriptive teaching. But I'm breaking them apart into three components for you today. Because each of those three components, or each of those three aspects of the descriptive teaching model, has an AAC user component, and it has a communication partner component. There are certain things we expect of our user, other things that are on our responsibility, are on our shoulders as the communication partner. So what's the difference? We're going to really, they all do connect, but I'm going to separate them apart just for clarity here today. Descriptive talking. Let's start with, what is that? Well, many AAC users naturally do descriptive talking. Nobody's taught it to them. They just do it. So what they're doing is, when they don't have, or maybe the word is in their device, in their speech generating devices, but they don't know where it is. They don't know it's in there even. They just start describing what they're trying to talk about with words they do have and they do know how to say with their speech generating devices. Meanwhile, communication partners should often be modeling descriptive talking when interacting. I know I model descriptive talking a lot. Sometimes it's intentional that I'm doing it for the purpose of teaching some of those core vocabulary words, but often, for many communication partners, it's because the partner doesn't know how to say the word that they want to say. They don't know, like the AAC user, they don't know if that word is in there or how to find that word. So they just start describing it. So both of us are frequently doing descriptive talking. Here's some examples. This is from Adam. I don't know Adam. I don't know who he is, but he had a posting at Facebook where he gave us an example of how his AAC user, who was using the LAMP Words for Life program in an iPad, I'm guessing, just naturally did descriptive talking. And he wrote, because cruise isn't in the LAMP vocabulary, and he meaning the AAC user, was trying to tell me where he was when he missed therapy with me, he said hotel ship. So this AAC user naturally said, I'm going to describe, because I can't spell cruise, because we're going to assume still he's not a competent speller, and I don't know if this word is in my device, or if it is, I don't know where it is. I'm just going to describe it. So you can see that this AAC user said, I slept in sleep bed, hotel ship. So I slept in the sleep bed. When I read the example, I'm not sure his descriptive talking is just hotel ship. I don't know this kid well. I don't know this kid at all, and I'm not there in the context. He could also say, I sleep in bed on the cruise ship. So it could be, his whole description could be sleep bed, hotel ship, that it's a way of letting us know it's a cruise ship. But I think you see the point here is that this kid just was naturally doing descriptive teaching. Now, the word cruise is not a core vocabulary word. It is what could be called a fringe. Some people refer to those as fringe. Other people call them extended vocabulary. I go back and forth. I'll say core and fringe or core versus extended. They mean the same thing. They're out there on the farther end of how frequently we use a word. And that always then broaches the question, should fringe or these extended vocabulary be added to the AAC system? So for this child who wanted to communicate the idea of cruise, should that word be added? He was trying to communicate it. Should it be added? So let's take a little side trip here, just a little side note, because I'm not really going to be talking about this now, but I want to make sure that people remember that those words are important. Fringe words or extended vocabulary words are important. Nobody like myself who advocates for teaching core ever would remove the fringe vocabulary from a communication device or tell you to not put those words in there. That is not our message. Those words are important. So because that was a child-driven example of descriptive talking, and he was interested in it, and he was wanting to talk about it, I would ask them, do you want me to add the word cruise in your device? And when that comes up, I would say only about 50% of the time do kids say, yeah, add that word. I think they may intuitively know whether or not they need it. Now, if this, or they don't need it. Let's imagine that this family goes on a cruise every year. Well, then cruise is a part of their family routine, and I would advocate, let's get that added in there. If this was a one-off, and their family says, I don't see us ever again going on a cruise, and he doesn't know anybody going on a cruise. He says, no, I don't need it. I probably wouldn't add it. But, so I want it to be child-driven. I don't want it to be primarily teacher or lesson-driven. This is what Bruce was trying to address when he introduced descriptive teaching, is that teachers and speech pathologists trying to meet the requests of teachers kept adding more and more and more and more extended vocabulary into the devices so that kids could give answers during the lessons. The whole point we're going to see of descriptive teaching is we are going to focus on using our core to give answers during the lessons for kids who are not able to spell those words during a lesson. So that we are teaching the words, teaching to put words together, and teaching kids to put on the word endings. So let's not lose focus on that here, just as we take this little side trip in adding fringe or extended vocabulary. But again, as I said, if it is child directed and child driven, put the word in there. Here again is another example that came off of Facebook where the mother posted exactly what her child said. So when her child said, I need one more button that has a picture of, there couldn't be any example more obvious that you need to add that word. And she gave, a long description of Cindy Lou Who. And in the red, which is 16 words, a little pink girl, and I think it is from the story about the Green Grinch. Every time she wants to talk about Cindy Lou Who, which seems to be really important to her, I don't want to have her go through 16 words to communicate that. And I don't know this girl at all. So the last words, which are green, they could be part of her description of this character, or they could just be what she wants to talk about listening to the movie. So she could easily either have been using 16 words to describe Cindy Lou Who, or she could have been using 28 words to describe Cindy Lou Who. So Yes, let's get Cindy Lou Who added to her device. So again, those perspective, that was child driven. Let's go back and think about the perspective on extended vocabulary in lessons, because the extended vocabulary words are generally very specific nouns and lesson specific verbs. And again, these words are not bad words. Hearing these words and learning these content words is important. But here's the big but that's always part of descriptive teaching. Putting the emphasis on those words and putting the emphasis on teaching the kids to say those extended words rather than describing them in a lesson. We don't want to do that. It's not good use of our time when that student hasn't yet learned their core vocabulary. So descriptive teaching is all about priorities. Where are we going to put our priorities? And when the student is still learning core vocabulary and putting those core words together, that's where your emphasis needs to be. Because helping the child use descriptive talking about the ideas behind those words, not only is it helping them learn those core vocabulary words, but it's promoting the kind of language development we want with our AAC users. And we're also going to see that it's going to start showing us what the child has actually learned in this lesson, which is the priority of the classroom teacher. Because classroom teachers, let's think about their teachers, and I'm hoping that I have a lot of teachers out there today in this session, because descriptive teaching, this descriptive teaching model is truly a collaborative approach between therapists, speech pathologists particularly, and classroom teachers and the entire classroom teaching team, paraprofessionals and everybody else, the volunteers, everybody else who's in that classroom with you. And when we think about descriptive teaching, teachers as the partners are going to be using core vocabulary to teach about the key concepts of a lesson. And I'm going to show you lots of examples as we move further through this presentation. So rather than handing me a list as a speech pathologist and say, could you program in these words? We don't use them a lot, but we're going to need them for the next 2 weeks in this lesson. So rather than trying to program in those infrequently used, you're not going to use the words often, and they're very specific to this lesson, rather than putting them into the device, let's make sure key concepts of the lessons are taught by you as the teacher using the core words to teach the concepts and modeling definitions or descriptions of the key concepts of your lesson with the words, these available core vocabulary words we want these kids to be learning so that they can use them. So that's the teacher's role, or the teaching team's role. The AAC user, during review of learning during the lesson, will be asked to repeat some or all of what was modeled, or even to add more ideas to the description. And this is sometimes where people kind of do a little pushback and say, whoa, I was told that when I do modeling, I should not ask the kid to repeat what I just modeled. And I'm going to say, yeah, if you're having a conversation and you're just having some give and take here, I don't ever ask my kid to repeat back what I just modeled. But I'm going to now put on my teacher's hat. And what do I do with a speaking kid? Well, with a speaking kid, I might say, well, photosynthesis is when a plant changes light into food. So I've modeled, I've given the definition to the speaking kid, and I'm going to turn around and ask that speaking kid to say, now, what did I just say to you? Were you listening? Or are you daydreaming about something? Are you fiddling with something at your desk? No, I need to know you're listening. So what did I just say to you about what is photosynthesis? So taking that approach, we're not just We're not modeling for just input and hoping that the kid has gotten something from it. We are now teachers. We're doing a lesson. So I do want them to repeat back. So if I have modeled photosynthesis is light into food. Now, let's see if you can do that. Tell me, what is photosynthesis? And maybe all the kid can give you back is the first word. Or maybe they give you back just one word, whatever word stuck out to them, and they said food. Well, then I know that they are trying to listen and they're engaged in active learning. I'm going to share with you throughout this day some testimonials from people because I've done this long enough with many of teachers. And I worked for many years with Mrs. Goggins. At the time, she was a third grade teacher. And one day she said to me, using descriptive teaching engages Linda, that's her AAC student, in the lesson. She looks and listens as we model lesson concepts. Then she repeats back, and I know she is learning. That phrase, I know she is learning, is echoed by so many teachers because they're not always certain that their AAC user who might be included in their general education classroom is learning. She knows her other students are learning because they're speaking back to them. But that AAC user who often sits very silently in that class, they're never quite sure that they're capturing some learning here. So having her repeat back is that first step in knowing we're on a path of learning. Here's Miss Randall, who's a first grade teacher. And she told me one day when doing a lesson on plants with Jay, I needed to teach the idea of photosynthesis to all the students. So that's the key concept. All students have to learn photosynthesis. By using words Jay already has in his device and knows, he is practicing those words. Plus, it helps him and all the students in my class understand and learn. It's great and easy to do as part of any and all my lessons. So I hope Miss Randall's words will echo in your ears when you start practicing this yourself to say, you know, it's not that hard to do in any lesson. So then we get to descriptive testing, the third component of the descriptive teaching model. And the teachers know how to test. And teachers, as the communication partners, are often going to ask questions that go beyond the fact answers. And that they're, as good teachers, you're probing for the learning of the deeper concepts behind those fact answers. And teachers already ask questions of their speaking kids that are descriptive testing questions. With our AAC users, we need to intentionally be asking questions that draw out descriptive responses from our AAC using students. And we have to intentionally be asking questions that probe higher order thinking. That's the kind of thinking that's more than just repeating facts. Now, the AAC users component is that they have to show that they're learning by answering these questions from the teacher. They have a responsibility as an active student, as well as they're going to, during testing times, participate in all the other assessment activities that the teacher might use, and hopefully it's going to continue to draw out their core vocabulary use and their generative language use. So whether or not that teacher has kids doing a discussion group or a group project or some sort of writing assignment, descriptive testing can apply in that context as well. Here's from Mrs. Goggins again. And this was her quote here is a bit of a moment of personal reflection and confession, which is good for all of us. And she coined to me the term regurgitation education when she said, before doing descriptive teaching and testing, we really were doing regurgitation education, which isn't really education at all. And what Mrs. Goggins had been asking her speech pathologist to do was program in 5 to 10 answers across a row in their child's device. And Mrs. Goggins would ask the questions in that specific order, so that all this kid had to do is push the first button, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, then the fifth, for example, to answer 5 questions. That kid wasn't learning anything. That kid had learned, I can pass this class if when Mrs. Goggin asks me 5 questions, I simply learn to push the buttons in the pattern of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I've got that down, she's happy. And so Mrs. Goggins wrote, now I know that Linda is learning and moving beyond just repeating facts. I wish I had learned this 30 years ago. She carried with her a lot of, well, she'll say guilt. Just saying, I just didn't know what to do, and I felt that this was showing that they had learned something, but she knew Linda had not really learned anything in some of her classes. Here's from Miss Randall's again. When it was time to test what Jay learned, I asked him, tell me something you learned about photosynthesis. And he said light into air. When I asked him why photosynthesis is important to him, he said, I want air, everyday breathing. Wow, that blew me away. I'm a new teacher, and I can't wait to tell other teachers about it. When Miss Randall told me this, I thought, she's sold on this. She had a very positive first experience, and she wants to share it with others, which is what I hope for all of you if you have not yet been implementing descriptive teaching, that you, like Miss Randall, have a very positive first experience, that you get all excited about it, and you want to tell other people. Now, I want to just look at Jay's response for just a second. He said, he brought up a phrase, that's a core vocabulary phrase. He brought up the word air, which is not core, it's fringe, it's extended. It's part of the specific vocabulary of this lesson, but it is in his device. And we did use it in the lesson. And then he brought up every day, which is core, and breathing, which is kind of I wouldn't call breathing a core verb, but it's a little bit further extended out. It's not specific just to this lesson, but you can see that his response was not all core, but was not all fringe either. So he's got this is a nice example of him learning core, learning some important fringe vocabulary, and he's got some respiratory issues, so he goes on a breathing machine. This is very important for him. And he's learning to put words together, not just in phrases, but in a nice word order, and he's learning how to put endings on a word, which is how he got breathing. We are meeting those mandates of what my mentors taught me to do. And so I'm happy to see that developing in Jay. So according to all those teachers who are doing, Miss Randall and the beginning new teacher doing descriptive teaching or talking, teaching, and testing, I could give you testimonial after testimonial, how they say in their classrooms, they feel it promotes greater engagement in the lessons. Kids are involved during the lesson. It increases lesson learning potential. Not every kid's going to learn and remember everything in a lesson, but this is really going to increase it for our students using AAC systems. It supports opportunities for practicing core vocabulary, which as the speech pathologist, I love. It is valuable for all students in the class. So if you've got a student who's included in a general education class, every other kid in that class is going to value it. If you are working in a special education environment and you've got 1 or 2 AAC users and you're doing descriptive teaching and talking with them, and the rest of your students don't use AAC, this kind of breakdown of lessons into its fundamental core words is valuable for all the students. They will say it's easy to do with any and all their lessons, so it's very doable, and it ensures real learning is happening with more valid measurement of that learning. So like Miss Goggins, she's like, I now know Linda is learning. I now know that I'm no longer doing just regurgitation of some facts. She's really learning something. There are also some language benefits of this, there should be nothing on this slide that shocks you. Because the deep language benefits, which I see as a speech language pathologist, it's meeting my goals, is we're going to use that stable vocabulary, that stable core vocabulary. We're going to do what I want to have done for all of my AAC users, is using those core words in different contexts. A fundamental principle of language learning is decontextualization, that we learn to use a word in many different contexts, and that happens with descriptive teaching, as well as provides incredible opportunity to practice putting words together into little 2 and 3 and sometimes 4-word phrases, and maybe like Jay, all the way into a pretty understandable sentence. So there's just such value to me that I know when a teacher's doing this in the classroom, he or she and I are together helping meet my speech language pathology goals, which is learn vocabulary, put words together, put endings on words. This is what my fundamental purpose in language development. But as I sit down with some of my teachers, I also know where they talk to me about the educational benefits of the descriptive talking, teaching, and testing model. And one of the benefits is founded in the principle called constructivism. And your own South African colleague, Maureen Casey, was the first one who really enlightened me in this area when we were together learning about descriptive teaching models. And constructivism basically says you build new knowledge. So I'm learning about photosynthesis. That's brand new to me. But you're going to build it on a foundation of previous learning. So I know about my core, so I can think about this new idea using words I already know what those mean. And I can't get into much more than that, but it really is a fundamental principle of education. Then another educational benefit is that, particularly in the US, and I don't know how all of your educational standards are organized across your South African provinces, but I know in the educational standards in the US, in the Common Core standards, we call them, that are nationwide, as well as individual states have their own educational standards. I'm in Florida, so I know my educational standards say kids have to do stuff like define, they have to describe, they have to discuss, they have to compare, they have to explain. So those are some of my key verbs. And regurgitation education, just putting 5 nouns across an activity row, is not going to help that child meet those educational standards, as well as it helps address the higher level thinking that we want in all of our students. You want that kind of thinking in your own children. If you have children that are right now going through school, you want them to think beyond just the facts. You want them to really be able to think more deeply. And so the educational benefits of descriptive teaching model is that it can help us address going to those higher levels of thinking that's specifically defined in Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And in Bloom's taxonomy of learning, those verbs are key. And if you don't have those examples of core, if you're not having kids, show you they really understand the key concepts, if you keep them at the recall of facts and you don't have them start explaining the definitions or the description of those facts, You're never going to get past just some basic understandings. It's very hard to move up this pyramid, to start saying, well, how am I going to apply this information? How am I going to, draw some connections with other things? How am I going to be able to have an opinion about it? Or how am I going to be able to create something new? If you don't have understanding, you're not going to move up. So descriptive teaching and testing is good for all students. We want this for all of our kids, whether they're in general education classrooms, whether they're in special education classrooms. A principle of just good education says, let's get beyond the facts. Let's promote some deeper thinking so we know we're getting some more authentic learning. So again, you could have been keeping a little tick list of how many times I talked about core vocabulary. It's the key idea. It's the key idea in any discussion about teaching, descriptive talking, teaching, and testing. So here's my little backtrack, a little side note. If it's new to you and you haven't really felt comfortable being able to understand what core vocabulary is, it is those high frequency common words that are part of our everyday language, whether they're pronouns, verbs, adjectives, prepositions, conjunctions, interjections. They're the real core. They form the center of our language production. It's really a small set of words. 350 to 400 words pretty much covers what is classically considered core vocabulary. And that small set of words does a lot of the heavy lifting in language production. It represents approximately 80% of what we say. So in any given sentence, 8 of 10 words core. So if we looked at that sentence, in any sentence, no, 8 of 10 are, we could have a little parlor games here where we each say some things, we listen to our conversation, we look at individual sentences, we say, yep, 80% is core. Yep, 80% is core, over and over. It really does break down to the emphasis that we need to be putting on our core. As well as for those of you who are into teaching and instructing kids on reading and writing. If you can't read these words, you can't write these words, your reading and writing is going to be in peril. It's going to be, you're going to need a lot of work on your reading and writing because you have to have core vocabulary for reading and writing. So that's why it's our first priority. It's not the only thing we want them to learn, but it's a top priority of what we want our AAC users to learn. And so how it relates to descriptive teaching is sometimes people say, well, I'm going to do in my daily schedule in my classroom, I'm going to have a core vocabulary time. And we look at core vocabulary during that special activity in my classroom, and then I don't think about core vocabulary for the rest of the day. No, the descriptive teaching model says I want us to be integrating core vocabulary and core language instruction throughout the day. It's not just a special little 20-minute slot in my schedule, because it's teaching the vocabulary, it's teaching the development of generative language, putting words together on my own. And from a practical perspective, I loved it when I didn't have to worry about trying to get all that vocabulary added to the device so that they could participate actively in a lesson by saying the lesson specific words in that. So I wasn't in that mad crazy mode anymore of trying to get these words added. And it really stopped for these teachers and for me that lesson after lesson after lesson cycle we were in, where we really acknowledge in our times of reflection and confession that we had been spending very valuable time. We are misspending it. We were misspending it on infrequently used lesson-specific extended vocabulary. And we said, we're not doing that anymore. We are going to put our priority on the core. So when you collaborate with teachers to do the descriptive teaching model, you're asking them to shift from a referential teaching style, which we will talk about. You're asking them to shift from a referential teaching style to a descriptive teaching style with their students, specifically with the students using the AAC system. But they start doing it with all of their students. They already do both of these styles with their students. But what we're going to be asking them to do is just do more. Do more and do it intentionally with students who are using AAC systems. Let's take a look at an example, and I picked an example lesson that I know is not specific to South Africans, but it is fairly wide known around the country about the Statue of Liberty. So in my example, I'm going to sit with this teacher and talk through with the teacher what her lesson plan is. Good teachers have lesson plans. I'm not asking a teacher to change their lesson plan. I'm not telling them what they should teach or how they're going to teach it. I'm just making some small adjustments and tweaks in their strategies for interacting with the AAC users. So in this lesson, the teacher had a plan. First off, they were all going to watch a video. And we know that's kind of passive learning. We're hoping kids, as they watch this video, something's going to resonate with them. It's a little bit of edutainment. Hopefully you've got a good video that engages the students. They're going to look at pictures of the Statue of Liberty. They're going to read stories about the Statue of Liberty. They're going to explore a replica statue. You can get lots of little, these little replicas, 6-inch Statue of Liberty you could have, buy a bunch of plastic ones for the kids to look at. Maybe they're going to interview some family members, maybe who have visited there, or maybe who came through Ellis Island when it was there and came through as an immigrant into the United States, and what a Statue of Liberty meant to you as an immigrant. And then they're going to write a personal story. So that's the teacher's lesson plan, solid lesson plan. Again, I'm not there to critique the teacher's lesson plan or to tell her what she is supposed to do. I'm going to trust she's a good teacher. And then in her teaching styles, again, all teachers use referential teaching. All teachers already do descriptive teaching. With the referential teaching, this is where the teacher is emphasizing the recall of facts. Again, there's not anything 100% wrong with that. It's not our emphasis with our AAC users. So they will likely ask the kids, what country gave us the Statue of Liberty? And some kid's going to answer France. They're likely to ask, what does she wear on her head? And they're going to say a crown. And what does she hold over her head? A torch. In what city will you find the Statue of Liberty? In New York. Those answers, there's usually only one correct answer, can usually be answered with one word, but there's not a lot of language payoff. So in the old days, I might have agreed with the teacher to create a page or an activity row, or I would have put in the kids' device some way where that they knew how to find it, the word France, crown, torch, and New York. And the kid would have been asked these 4 questions and regurgitated back, going from left to right, France, crown, torch, New York. That would have been using the referential teaching style. The descriptive teaching style, it starts going beyond the facts, and it starts probing for understanding, application, opinion. These are those Bloom's higher order thinking aspects. And when you ask those kinds of questions, there's a lot of ways kids could answer. There's a lot of acceptable answers our students could give us. Generally, it's going to encourage the use of multiple words to give an answer. Not always. Sometimes a kid will just give you one word, but it generally is starting to enter this arena where more words are likely to be produced by the child, and it offers a greater language learning payoff. Because now as a speech pathologist, I'm looking at what could the kid be saying. So the kinds of questions you could be asking are like, why did France give us the Statue of Liberty? Well, maybe one kid says, well, it was a present or it was a gift, and it was done to help us remember. And maybe if they said, well, what big idea does it help us remember? And maybe they say, we are free. Now, again, not word free. You might say, is that core word? Well, it's not necessarily a lesson specific word. It's a little extended. But if you didn't have the word free and you couldn't spell the word free, then, you have to kind of, what big idea does it make us remember? We live, no one tell us what we do. What is the definition of free? Not under someone. There's a lot of other ways that we can circumlocute around that. The statue is a symbol. What can you tell me about a symbol? What does this crown symbolize? These are, you're looking at some of these and going, I'm not sure my kids could do this. But remember, while you were teaching the lesson, you should have been modeling some of these ideas. When you were teaching the lesson, you would have said, we are free. We are free. Free means not under them. We were not under England anymore. We're not under them. What does it mean to be free? Not under them. So we're not asking kids in the descriptive teaching style to come up with these on their own. Remember that. It would have been part of the teaching of the lesson. So as you look at my examples, don't freak out. They can give me these answers back because I taught them these concepts. Then let's think about the facts and higher order thinking. You need facts. There's nothing wrong with having facts. But we also need higher order thinking. So if we think about the Statue of Liberty, what material is it made of? It's made of copper. That's a fact. What causes copper to turn green over time? Well, it's air. It's a process called oxidation. I might have taught about what that was. And then this higher order thinking is, why do you think pennies turn green? Made of same thing. If a kid can give you that, they're thinking beyond the facts. They're really applying that information to something else around the world. What do you think happens to the statue when it is very windy? And again, I might have had our kids use your words or show me with your body what happens to it when it's very windy. And then use your words to talk to me about it. So it's that get beyond the facts and get our kids thinking more. Now, the concerns people always give me, and they're valid concerns, and I have answers for them. The first being, this is too much for my students. These questions are too complex. It's not realistic for my students to give 2- and 3-word answers. Well, then that becomes on our shoulders to say, if you're saying to me, we have to simplify this. All right, my examples seem too complex. Well, then you're good teachers. Let's talk through how do we simplify it. So I would say, let's think about, okay, the question, what does a crown symbolize? Which is like, we all belong with that crown. We're all invited to, what can you tell me about a crown? Maybe if all that kid can tell you about, I've learned something, a crown is on, and they touch their head. It's something you wear. It's up here on top. So you simplify the answers. You change, why did France give us the Statue of Liberty? To maybe they gave it to us as a gift. Tell me about getting a gift. You take it down to the level where they've had some life experience. And you tell me about a gift. I'm giving you a gift. When do you get a gift? This is where you go to those probes. What do you say after you get a gift? How does a gift make you feel? You like a gift, it makes you feel happy. So you can start trying to go into a little bit of learning, but bring it down for kids with some very complex communication needs. And if a kid gives you a 1-word answer, like, tell me what you know about a crown. What can you tell me about a crown? Where is it? It's head. Then you probe to draw out. Or they've used the word preposition. It's on. So you go into your mode where they give you a one-word answer. They give you the word preposition of on. And then you recast what he said and say, yes, it is on her head. And you expand it. And then maybe if they can come back to you, on head, it on, then you're really happy that they are engaged in some learning here. Second concern, I can't do this all the time. This is going to take a lot of time. It's going to make the lesson take longer. And I got a lot of other students I got to manage. I just can't do this. My advice to those teachers who are feeling overwhelmed with the concept of the descriptive teaching model is to say, start simple. Take a deep breath. This is new to you, so let's start simple. Let's do one lesson a day done with descriptive teaching and the AAC user. And then let's gradually add more as you become comfortable with it. My goal for most teachers is 30 to 50% of all lessons are done with this model. Now, with some of these good teachers, like Mrs. Goggins, I think she does it 80 to 90% of her lessons are done with this, because she's made such a shift to make sure that what she typically did with speaking kids, she's now doing with the AAC user. But at least start with one lesson a day. And if you can only do it one-on-one with the AAC user, well, that's the place to start. Then you start adding in to that one-on-one you were doing with the AAC user, start doing it in some small groups with other students who would benefit from the simplified language of the lesson. I'm always stunned when I work with adolescents and adults who have such deep vocabulary deficits, because they graduated from general education programs in the US, but they somehow skirted by, not knowing what simple words meant like support or benefits, because nobody ever broke those words down for them. And then do it with subjects and lessons that offer real opportunities for discussion. For example, social studies versus math. Which one would you have more discussion time during? Well, I typically lean towards social studies. A lot more conversation and descriptive talking can happen with social studies versus doing math facts. So don't make them think you have to do it all the time. So I'm not saying that to you today either. Start. You have to get started. You won't be doing it if you don't just at least get started. Another thing, I don't want to leave out the content words of a lesson. Again, I'm going to say this over and over so you don't misunderstand me. No one is asking you to leave them out. They are not bad words. They need them. They're important for language enrichment, but emphasizing them as the expressive words the AAC user is going to say isn't good use of time when they still haven't learned their core vocabulary. And it is okay to add some subject-specific words because they're needed from first grade to graduation. For example, the word author, illustrator, topic. And these kind of subject-specific words are important to have in there, not only for doing talking, but writing. Because I can remember a middle school teacher who said to me, I need Jay to say, the author is. That's what I'm looking for in the structure. And he was using a computer-driven writing assessment program. And the writing assessment program is looking for the word author. She doesn't want him to have to say, the person who wrote the book is. Now, in conversation, when you talk about who is an author, what is an author? An author is the person who writes it. But when I'm writing, you say, the author is. And these are words that Jay used when he was in first grade and he used when he graduated from high school. So certain words, some examples I've given you from science. Hypothesis, experiment, data, conclusion. I make sure they understand what they mean, can give me a good descriptive definition of what it means, but also for conversation and writing and doing assignments. It's not bad to have these subject-specific words. So in science class, or experiments, you're going to do experiments from first grade to graduation in science class, and your experiments are going to go from, everything from, watching an ice cube melt and timing how long it takes to dissecting something in high school. All right, when doing descriptive teaching, I just want you always to never forget why you're doing it in the first place. Because you might not have to do it forever. Now, I have a number of boys I work with. I call them all J. But for specificity today, I'm going to say Joshua. I did descriptive teaching extensively with Joshua, and I picked him up when he was 4. So from the time he was 4 to about 10 or 11, we did descriptive teaching for him to do his classroom lessons because he was not yet literate. He is now literate. And I'll do descriptive talking with him in order to describe new words and new concepts, but he is now sufficiently literate to spell lesson-specific words. So that's under one condition where I would say I'm going to start pulling back on descriptive teaching. I rarely ever just stop it completely, because remember, so much of descriptive teaching is that part where we're talking through the key concepts with core vocabulary words. And our AAC users always need that. The second condition that you might not always want to do it is they've learned their core vocabulary words. One of the points was we want to make sure they've learned these 350 to 4 words so that we can move on to teaching other language things. So, you're not specifically saying I got to organize my lesson around the descriptive teaching model. But we might always, remember, we might always want teachers to interact with our students using descriptive rather than referential teaching, because we do want them to have this deeper thinking and richer learning. And as always, we want to promote word combinations rather than just single word answers. So the descriptive, all those benefits of the descriptive teaching model are still in place, even though your AAC user now might be sufficiently literate to spell lesson-specific words. Again, Mrs. Goggins, at first when you told me about descriptive teaching, it sounded like you were telling me that I wasn't teaching correctly. But after we did some lessons together, I saw that I was already doing it with other students, and I only needed to do it more with Linda. And so she grasped that idea. We don't want to put a burden on our teachers where they feel like this is a criticism of them. It's an adjustment in what we want them to do to emphasize those core words in real language learning. Here's Mr. Dicker. He's a middle school teacher. Teaching lesson concepts with core words made me simplify hard ideas with easier words. That's constructivism. Simplify hard ideas with easier words. Before I said that during photosynthesis, light is captured and converted. He just used those words. He just assumed all the rest of the middle schoolers knew what those meant. Now I say that plants take in light, that's captured, take in light, and change it to something else, that's converted. I never realized how much I was teaching complex concepts with complex words. I want you just to let that, chew on that idea a little bit. How often are we all teaching complex concepts with complex words? And then he gives us the cherry on the top. Now all my students are doing better, not just the special education students that were included in my class. And so if I could put Mr. Decker in front of you here today, he could give you example after example of where he realized he was teaching complex concepts with complex words. And implementing descriptive teaching changed that for him. He became very enlightened and he changed his behavior. Now, addressing teacher buy-in. Does every teacher embrace me as I walk into their class? They say, oh, here's the world famous Gail Van Tatenhove coming in here. No, you are never a prophet in your own hometown. They don't know who I am. I'm somebody that's been brought into their class and they're going to be resistant. It happens. So you're going to have to figure out how are you going to get teacher buy-in if you're going to be sharing this with a teacher. Well, first off, take sufficient time to clearly describe the reasons that descriptive teaching is essential for AAC users. And I hope this presentation gives you that information. You have the handout of this presentation. You have a one-page summary, which might be a good thing to share with those teachers. They're not likely to want to look at 60 or 96 slides, but that one-page summary is a resource I've given you to share as widely and broadly as you want. Second, you need to separate buy-in of descriptive teaching from buy-in of AAC and inclusion of the student in the classroom. There's many times that when I've sat down with the teacher where they are said they're very resistant, the resistance comes from a deeper place. They just don't want that kid in their classroom. And they're not sure about AAC and why AAC is important. So you got to separate those two components out, because if you don't have buy-in in AAC,
okay,
and
I'm
don't,
going to complete online and forward to you, like we discussed.
I hear somebody's, make sure your mics are off, please. I hear somebody. All right. That you're not confusing the issues here. Next, you really want to openly and honestly address their fears and concerns about showing a different way to teach. But that's not going to happen the first time you sit down with them. Mrs. Goggins did not share with me her fear of failures, her fears of being judged and critiqued. So you got to come in kindly and gently, and you need to come in not telling them what to do, but showing them what to do. So I generally do concentrated lessons myself in that class. I'll do 3 to 5 lessons in 1 week. Not I'll come in this week and then I'm going to come in another month, or I would say I'll come in this one day and then next month I'll come in for a half a day. No, I say for the next week, I'm going to clear my schedule and I'm going to be in this class with you 3 to 5 times doing the lesson. And then we're going to do the lesson together. So you bring them on gently. You practice what you preach. You do it and show it to them in their classroom with those real kids. And it has given me a deep appreciation always of the management skills teachers have in classrooms. So why are these concepts important for everyone to learn? I've been addressing speech pathologists, teachers. I'm also going to touch on parents. These concepts are important for speech pathologists because I don't want to sidetrack. We got to keep our focus on the prize, which is core vocabulary. It's important for us to develop our skills doing this with teachers and parents. They're the ones that spend the majority of time with these kids. We have to have our skills improved for collaborating with them. Teachers, I want them to understand how core vocabulary is the foundation for all language, for all learning and literacy. I want them to have their skills in applying these principles of descriptive teaching. And I want them to know when and when not to expect students to repeat after me. You know, I don't want them to be modeling and then make everything that they say the kid has to repeat. That's I've seen that happen where they go way on the other side. No, they repeat after me when you're doing your initial teaching. When you want to make sure that they're actively listening and they can say back to you the key ideas that are part of that lesson. I want parents to appreciate that being able to talk descriptively is not only really an important skill for school, but it's an important life skill. If their child is at risk for developing literacy and spelling skills, you're going to need this skill the rest of your life, whether you choose to talk about a cruise ship, what a cruise ship is, or you have other issues related to your safety or your health, you have to be able to communicate words that are not specifically available to you in your AAC system. And you can't spell. So these are words, and I do descriptive teaching with people all the way into adulthood. I have adults that I've done this thing and they're in their 20s and 30s and 40s. So it's an important life skill that we all need. So let's talk about the very practical steps to practice descriptive teaching in the classroom. First two questions: does descriptive talking come naturally to kids, or are there teaching activities you can do to support it? It comes naturally to some kids, not to all. Then there are teaching activities you're going to do. So then specifically, how do you teach kids to talk descriptively? In conversation or in classroom lessons? So I'm going to go back to thinking about how did I in the early days teach AAC users to talk descriptively, and then also how do I continue to use these principles today? These principles have stayed true for about 40 years. So in terms of talking descriptively, I have resources I've used. I'm not here to promote any of these resources, but to be able to simply say, I still embrace the idea of special symbols. I learned it with Bliss Symbolics. I continue to use it in our speech generating devices. I have in my kids' AAC systems a row or a page of information that is their special symbols. And this is just a wall chart I use. I love my wall charts when I'm doing lessons because it represents at a glance the core words I want to use. And I can circle things on the chart that I want to use as part of my lesson. But on my chart, I have special symbols like same as, opposite of, looks like, sounds like, part of, same group as, add to the front, that would be a preverb, add to the end, that would be a suffix, picture part of, so there's something in the picture that I got to pay attention to, starts with, that would be, starts with a certain letter, or starts with a certain word, and join words that I'm going to take two words and put them together to make a new word. So I intentionally make sure I have those symbols, those strategies available in a paper form, and if not in a paper form, also in the speech generating device, because in the speech generating device, they will then serve as clues the kid could use to help a less informed communication partner as to what they're doing. So here they are in the speech generating device. And how do you teach this? Well, with the teacher, the therapist, the parent, first step is you add these special symbols. And in lessons, you're going to, like everything else as a teaching model, we're going to model them. We're going to model them in the device. We're going to model them on the wall chart. So you're going to do that in both of them. And then you're going to model them, but modeling only, I always think, gets you so far. You also have to do some very explicit teaching. And I want to do very specific lessons to supplement the modeling. So here's one of an organizer I use. I love organizers to teach these strategies. This one is very specific to a MinSpeak program because the color coding is reflective of how those parts of speech are color coded in the speech generating device. You'll see that there's the printed word action under the green, and there is the symbol next to it. That is the very specific symbol on a MinSpeak system that it will be used to code verbs. So that's just an example of how this would be a very program-specific organizer. So that as the child is trying to, all right, that's just my alarm that says I have a half an hour. So we're going to use this program-specific organizer for that student to, as I'm giving them clues, say, well, give me an action word. You're trying to say something. What's an action word that would describe it? What's an attribute? What person would use it? Is it another thing that's like it? What time of day might you use it? Give me a word that's the same as, or maybe something that sounds like it, or something that would go with it. So as the kid is giving me a word, I'm going to be writing this down. Now, I can turn this into a game. I can have them where they're looking at something, and if I have an assistant, that's helpful. Maybe there's a box with a bunch of hidden things, and I don't know what's in the box, and they've got to describe what's in the box with all these other words, and I have to guess it. And if I can guess it in a certain number of times, they get a prize. You can turn it into all sorts of a fun game where you're specifically teaching them to think broadly about ways that they could describe this thing. Next thing is you teach circumlocution. As a teacher, as a parent, as an SLP in lessons, again, you model it on the wall chart. You can model teaching circumlocution, where you're talking around the word in your lessons. And once again, provide explicit supports and instruction, which is very much like teaching the strategies, because once again, I'm going to use that organizer. I'm in Speak Specific. Or my other favorite way to teach circumlocution in these very specific strategies is, rather than writing them on one piece of paper on this chart, I start writing what they're telling me on a appropriately color-coded card. And so all those cards have a little magnet on the back, and as they give me ideas, I can put the idea on the board, because all these cards will be taken off the front of this board, and I can start seeing the 2 or 3 words that they're giving me. Because when I'm doing circumlocution, I'm kind of aiming more towards build a phrase or sentence rather than just give me random one-word ideas. So if I have them writing these different words on cards, then I can start moving them around until I get the phrase or the 2 or 3 word combination that is a nice reflection of some generative language I'm hoping they're going to start replicating and producing. How do you teach them to tell their communication partners what they're doing? Many times communication partners, when a kid's giving you 2 or 3 words and they're giving you a definition, they're describing a thing, that parent might think, well, they're making a sentence now. No, there's a difference between a definition versus it's part of my sentence. So I want to make sure in the AAC system I've add informative messages. I'm going to make sure I do coaching during conversational interaction, as well as I'm going to do explicit lessons. And these lessons and coaching are let your communication partner know what you're doing. So there might be alert messages. So my device has alert messages like what I want to say isn't in my device. It has a pre-stored sentence. I'm not asking them to build that word by word. It's a pre-stored sentence. I'm putting words together to describe something, not build a sentence. I've got things that I might call a repair message, like you're way off, let's start over. That's a repair message. Or situational or linguistic cues. They've got a message that says, it's about something you were talking about before. Okay, like what were we talking about? Well, like 10 minutes ago? Okay, what were we talking about before? Oh, now I know what you're saying. So I'm adding some programming to their devices so unfamiliar communication partners in particular can be informed about what strategies the AAC users is doing. When you collaborate with teachers to do descriptive talking, teaching, and testing, give them resources to use in their classrooms. Like you saw my wall chart, you saw my graphic organizer, and teach the practical steps to doing it while teaching classroom lessons, or doing it and using it. So you just don't hand them a chart, you don't just hand them a graphic organizer and not explain it. You show them how to use it. As a starting point, when I'm working with a teacher, I always go back to what they should know. What are your standards? What are you expected to teach? And how do you intend to teach that? That's always the starting point. So I'm going to go through these relatively quickly because I think these are pretty explanatory. That the steps were on plants. Students will describe, discuss, and explain the role of plants. So we take a look at what do our standards say students will do. You know, the standard doesn't say they have to name all the plants. In the referential teaching model, you would have had the kids say leaf, stem, root, flower. But you know what? That's not what the standards say the kids have to do. Then we'll review their lesson plan. Okay? And we will then figure out, based on the standards, your lesson plan, what words you need for the lesson plan. Let's see if these words are in the device. If they're not in the device, let's make some simple definitions or descriptions. And let's put together some essential, simple visual supports. So in this lesson on plants, there's already a lot of extended or fringe words in the device. But photosynthesis is not in there. Neither is the word support or absorb, because they are key concepts of a lesson, nor is the word nutrients. So we're not going to skip those three words. We're going to talk about what do they actually mean. And then we'll write a simple plan for how are we going to support this student during the lesson. And we'll generally do a little role playing, where I'm going to teach it and model, then maybe they teach it and model it to me, that we are going to practically practice, make a plan of how is this going to apply to the AAC user and practice it. And generally, our state standards in Florida can only be met with expressive language. They are not receptive language measurements. They are expressive language assessments. So we have to get our kids talking. So we do our prep. We think, well, what are some visual supports? If we can look up the device, we can look up in the device, we can look up in a software program, and we can put together some very simple visual supports, just saving the work that we've done. We've got our wall chart. I love my wall chart. The first time I can get in that classroom that the teacher is ready, I bring that wall chart, because that is for me generally the only visual support I worry about. That I have my wall chart of the words organized by parts of speech with the printed word on the board, as well as the symbols or the navigational path of what symbols I have to push to say it in my device. But you know, I try don't make too many extra visual supports, because teachers then start managing paper instead of managing the child. So don't go crazy making visual supports. Keep it to what is the most absolutely essential things that are that's all you need. And most of the time the teachers say, at first I wanted you to make all this stuff for me. But after a month or two of doing this, just the wall chart, I don't need all this other stuff. I can't manage it all. So a wall chart's my go-to visual support. So I'm going to let you take a look at these examples, that in organizing lessons for Jordan, we wanted to make sure in planning for him particularly, he would always have an opportunity to do something. We would always make some accommodation so he could participate with his classmates. And there was generally some specific language that we wanted to target. So all kids are going to plant seeds. So is Jordan. All students have to describe the parts of the plant. So is Jordan. All students have to discuss the functions of the plants. So will Jordan. All students will do a worksheet. So will Jordan. So we were able to say those activities he can do. All students will write a short paragraph of at least 3 sentences. Jordan only had to write 2. And what he demonstrated to us in his independent writing why plants are important to us. They food, so he brought up they food to eat, help make clean in nose. I say Jordan learned some fundamental things from this lesson. He went way beyond just name the parts of the plant. He understands the importance of plants in our environment to help keep our air clean and to give us healthy food to eat. So he's gained the knowledge. This is the mother of Linda. Linda has grown so much this past year. She has learned most of her core vocabulary and talking with phrases and some sentences. So not only core, but starting to put words together. If you got kids who are stuck on just one word talking, look at what you're doing. Are you too heavy in nouns? If you just got a bunch of nouns, you're not going to get phrases. You're not going to get sentences. So we have to, shift that to core and start modeling these phrases and sentences. She also said, plus she loves being part of the lessons with her friends. Mrs. Goggins is working with other teachers at her school to teach them how to use descriptive teaching in their classrooms. So I know that Linda is going to have great teachers after Mrs. Goggins retires. Yep, Mrs. Goggins retired, but she trained others, and Linda went through this school. Linda's now graduated, but she went through this school, and she had great teachers where one teacher said, this is what worked in my class, and taught the next teacher. So that's another one of my hopes for you all after today. And then the parents of Jay in Miss Randall's class, both my husband and I were nervous about Jay being in Miss Randall's class because Jay is a first-year teacher. Maybe some of you out there today are first-year teachers. But over the school year, we see how much language Jay has developed with her using her wall chart when teaching lessons. And last night she told us, Miss Randall is strongest best girl fly me. That's his way of him saying Miss Randall is Supergirl to me. So there's evidence of Jay using descriptive talking, spontaneous descriptive talking to define Supergirl as strongest, best girl fly, Supergirl. And because the parents know their son or know their daughter, she could understand what that meant. Again, realistic expectations. Let's be realistic about this. I live in the real world. Start simple and steadily expand. So I've already mentioned that a little bit. So you start one-on-one maybe before large groups. Short, simple lessons and incrementally increase. Maybe you have to selectively implement it with a couple kids, other students in small groups. Or in just a few lessons or subjects where you know there are great opportunities to talk. I promise you, some will become spontaneous. Just get them started. Just start. And eventually teachers have to do less and less lesson readjusting and planning. They just adopt it into their everyday strategies and they can just do it on the fly. And as well, be sensible. I've mentioned this so many times. We're exposing the students to those other words that are specific to the lesson. It's okay to add some subject-specific words. And maybe there's times you got to go low-tech, some simple solutions in your lesson. Doesn't say you can't use, put out some answers if you need to on some sticky notes. Draw out a symbol and lay them out so they can give you answers. Let's say this is a geometry. I can't get the word out. Geometry class. I don't want to have to really do a lot of descriptive talking on some of these things if I can just draw them out and do them simply. Some schools have collections of manual boards that they've kept on file for very specific lessons. Okay, if you want to implement those, that's okay as a supplement. It's a supplement. It's not the replacement of descriptive teaching. With Jay, when we did the lesson on the parts of the plant, he did some simple encoding on a worksheet. As Joshua got more advanced in school, we used word banks. So he didn't always have to spell them. And it helped him develop some of his spelling with word banks or word lists. Those are acceptable as well to supplement. All right, I'm going to take about 5 minutes, not a lot of time, but we're going to do a little practice here. A little practice of this, and this is where you can put some of your responses in the chat window. And I'm not going to belabor any of this, but I'm going to show some a lesson from the Florida Standards for Health. And these are first grade points. These are called our access points for students on a special education track. So these are not kids in general ed. These are our special ed kids students. And these are the goals our state of Florida has for kids at this level to understand about keeping good health, being healthy. And each of these access points has some learning objectives. And here are, 6 of them. And the standard is that all these special needs kids have to be able to explain ways to prevent communicable diseases. How do you keep from getting sick? You wash your hands, don't share utensils, maybe you wear a mask. That's the standard. And look at that verb, explain. Explain. That means talking has got to be going on. They'll be able to define healthy versus unhealthy. They have to give examples of healthy versus unhealthy. They have to say ways to prevent sickness. They have to describe germs, state when hands should be washed, and demonstrate or describe. They can't, physically get to the sink and demonstrate this, proper hand washing. So here's what I want us to do. Now, this is a word board, and I apologize, it may be way too small for some of you to see on your screens. But for this purpose, I didn't use a picture board. I didn't use a device. I didn't want anybody to have to be thrown off by symbols. I'm saying, let's just imagine there are symbols here. Let's just imagine these are the words that are in the kids' device. But for simplicity, you got these printed words available to you. So the first things kids have to do is define healthy versus unhealthy. So in the chat window, based on words that are here, and you can go with a one-word example. What's a definition of healthy? And when kids are like, and you're sitting here, when you're healthy, you fill in the blank. So I'm going to look at the chat window. No chat yet. I know there are people out there. Strong, excellent. You feel strong, you feel good, perfect. You're right on, perfect. You got it. How about what's unhealthy? Give me a definition of unhealthy. And it's generally we're going to think of what's the opposite. You feel bad. Yeah, you feel bad. Kristen, not hot, bad, excellent. All right, you're perfect, great. How about what are some behaviors that keep you healthy? What do we have to do to stay healthy? Wash hands, good. What are other behaviors to keep us healthy? Remember, in our lesson, we would have gone through this. So you may want to look at some verbs in the green sections, and they are alphabetical. Eat well, perfect, Shaquila. Eat breakfast, yep, can't skip a breakfast. Walk, run, excellent. So just using our core words, we're meeting our state standards. How about, let's look at another slide. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. What are 2 ways to prevent illness? How do we keep from getting sick? How do we keep from getting sick? And you've got some nouns on here that you might be able to use. How do you keep from, because we have to define prevent. Prevent means not get sick. Stop people from making us get sick. Wash hands, clean water, excellent, clean water. Eat healthy, wash hand, absolutely. I came up with, when I did a lesson with kids, I'll give you some examples kids gave me. Hand over mouth. Again, sometimes it's all based on how you actually taught this lesson. Stay home, yes, please. Anushka, yes, when you're sick, please stay home. But as we taught the lesson, we would have demonstrated, you put your hand over your mouth, take medicine, stay away sick people, tell mom, feel bad. All these ways to prevent illness. Do exercise, excellent, thank you. You guys know how to prevent illness. Well done. Let's look at the next slide. Describe germs for me. Now, again, I haven't done the lesson with you. So if you're thinking about now, I'm going to do the lessons with kids. How am I, with the words to describe, how am I going to describe a germ? They're dirty, bad, make sick, can make sick, small. There you go. I was looking for small, like small. It's little. You cannot see it with your eyes. When I taught this lesson, we talked about germs are microscopic. And as Claire said, you cannot see them. You don't know how dirty you are. Yeah, bathrooms are filled with germs. They're all over. Where do we find lots of germs in your bathroom? Actually, the dirtiest place in your house is your telephone. Not so much the bathroom, but describe germs. You know, they're bad little things. Body doesn't like them. Excellent. You know, you're spot on here. State when hands should be washed. So when should you wash your hands? What times? After eat, after bathroom. So now we got some prepositions coming in, before eat. So now we're bringing in some other language, and we got some time concepts going on. Some kids have said, yeah, before eat, after bathroom, when dirty, after in mouth, when messy, after sick. So kids, you know, could do this. And then finally, demonstrate or describe, and we're going to describe before you cook. Yep. Describe proper hand washing. So what are some of the elements that need to be in place? Soap, put soap, water. Tell me about the water. What should the water be like, Heloise? I would go a blue word, second column, about 6 words. Warm water, clean water, hot water. Yep, clean waters. These are clean water. Some of the things kids have said to me, based on the lesson, how you actually did the lesson. Hot water, underwater, put on white stuff, because we don't have the word soap on here. Put on white stuff. So they did descriptive teaching within descriptive teaching. Wash, count 20, because they have to count to 20. Sing wash song, because there's a song that teacher would sing. You have to wash for as long as you can sing the song. More water, dry, clean thing. You gotta, you don't dry your hands on your dirty shirt. You dry them on a clean towel. All right. So you got it. So what kind of thinking are you actually using? You know, if I say name 2 things you need to wash your hands, you would maybe say soap, water. That's remember. When I ask you to show me how you wash your hands and talk about how you wash your hands, you're applying this information. If I said, let's use a black light, let's put it on your hands, then tell me how well you washed your hands. If I'm doing an activity and then I'm evaluating, and the kid might say, good job, bad job, wash more, dirty, you know, very dirty or clean. And then using the black light, tell me how clean your hands are compared to mine. That's analyzing. That's making a comparison. So in doing these activities and having kids use core vocabulary while you're doing that, you are using lots of different kinds of thinking as defined by Bloom's taxonomy. So as I wrap up here, and I'm going to have 5 some minutes at the end for us to have some chatting, I would like to encourage you to make a personal plan to how you're going to implement descriptive teaching. And I hope in your personal plan, you'll set up a time with a teacher, with a parent, another therapist, wherever. Set up a time with somebody to share what you've learned. I hope you'll Google descriptive teaching and explore what you can find. There's other people who do presentations on this. If you need a little bit more information, you want it from another perspective, take a look at some of those things. I would encourage you in your plan to develop at least 2 lesson plans. Then video yourself doing one of those lessons, because you will see things that will shock you, that we are blind to until we see it on a screen in front of us and we are doing it. Then watch the video with a friend, and I suggest a friend who is frank but kind, who will help you see things and problem solve what you need to change. I have friends who have done that for me, And I hope you have friends that will do that for you as well. So here's my summary. This is a summary points of what we've gone through. I did not invent descriptive teaching. It can be broken into descriptive talking, teaching, testing. Core vocabulary is what this is all about. And we want our teachers shifting from referential teaching to descriptive with our students. It's good for all students. And when you collaborate with teachers, you have to be very practical with them and give them resources to use in their classroom, show them examples with you in there, truly collaborate with them. If you want to learn more about descriptive teaching models, there's an article I've written. There's an article that Debbie Witkowski and Bruce Baker wrote. Carol Zangari has a really nice video that explains descriptive teaching at her Practical AAC blog. And I will end with this one thought from a colleague of mine out of Germany who's an OT, which this has really resonated with me for years. And that is, some people want kids to talk. Others want to hear what kids have to say. And I've embraced that saying, and I believe descriptive teaching helps us embrace that model. We just want kids to talk by regurgitating back a bunch of answers. I really want to hear what kids have to say. And I hope you'll join that community of people that have that same fundamental belief. So I will say, thank you with that.